Left-hand apotheosis, transhumanism and the rulership's quest for godhood. Okay, so this talk, which is part one of two, will pertain to the truth as I perceive it regarding transhumanism. And we're going to look at transhumanism from a holistic perspective, a philosophical and even occulted perspective, in order to bring transhumanism into the light of truth, into the realm of what it truly is to be a human being, because this question is integrally related to transhumanism. But first, I think we should define transhumanism in its official mainstream sense. So, officially, transhumanism is often abbreviated as H plus or humanity plus, and it is officially defined as an international cultural and intellectual movement with an eventual goal of fundamentally transforming the human condition by developing and making widely available technologies to greatly enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. So it is the merging of a human being and indeed humanity as a whole with technology to become something different than what it is to be a human being. So just from that mainstream definition alone, there are already many alarming things we should take account of, such as its proclamation that it wishes to transform the human condition. It also has a very collectivist type leaning, which I think we should treat with an honest suspicion. After all, the most efficient way to control human consciousness is to collectivize it. And based upon this mainstream definition, it focuses primarily on physicality and mental or intellectual operational matters, while ignoring other aspects of being. And there's actually quite a bit of other reasons for concern as well, but before we completely delve into transhumanism, I think we should lay some groundwork before we can approach this topic, or any topic for that matter, in any meaningful or adequate way. We need to bring some wisdom into the realm of this topic, because if there is one thing that transhumanism lacks more than any other thing, it is wisdom. So it is my perception that each of us, so long as we are willing to do so, has our own unique piece of the puzzle to communicate. Not only about transhumanism, but really pertaining to all matters of truth. And when we live in truth and share our own unique perspectives on that which is aligned with what is true, we contribute to the disillusion of shadow in our world today. And what I mean by shadow is those things that are obscured from the illumination of truth. The causal or primary reason for the problems of our world, the pain and suffering that is occurring in our world, and the ignorance and naivety of the human beings in our world is all due simply to the fact that much of humanity exists in misalignment with truth. So if we're concerned first and foremost with truth, we should define it. And in defining truth, one might imagine that we could try and make it something really complex, but really, defining truth is quite simple and straightforward. The truth very simply is that which actually is. Truth is that which is actually taking place within us and around us. And this is something that is possible for us to come to know, for us to make contact with, so long as we are willing to do so. And the want or desire to come into contact with truth is actually the factor in this process of coming to know truth that is of the utmost importance. So just as truth is capable of being known, we are also capable of not knowing it, of ascribing to false ideas and not living in truth. And it is precisely this misalignment with what is true, as I said, that leads to suffering. So humanity experiences suffering when ideas or ways of being that are false or not true are accepted as truth, and when individuals simply refuse of their own will to accept what is true. And although this is unfortunate, it isn't at all that surprising, because humanity has descended into shadow and became misaligned with truth to such a degree that much of the truth is what is actually occurring in our world has become so ugly and perhaps even initially scary or disturbing or even painful to look at, both collectively and individually, that most people have chosen to willfully ignore what is actually taking place. And so out of this willful ignorance comes broken ideas or perversions of philosophy, in which individuals do not want to accept truth, so they do a very clever thing, which is claim that the truth exists only on an individual basis of perception. They claim that the truth does not exist outside of one's perceptions and is merely relative to what one experiences on a personal basis. And this is relativism, the philosophical position that all points of view are equally valid, and that all truth is merely relative to the individual, that the truth does not exist outside of one's perception. It's easy to see how this ideology would arise in a false world, because why even seek to know truth and grow in higher proximity to truth if it can only be defined on a personal level? This serves to keep people from ever embarking on a journey of truthful discovery, and also comforts those who are unwilling to see the truth of our world. Others know the truth to be universal in nature, that it indeed exists regardless of one's perceptions of it, and is an all-encompassing universal phenomenon. So that is the other extreme, the other side of this argument. But let's not fall prey into being trapped in the box of labeling truth as either relative or universal, one thing or the other. Let's transcend this dichotomy. It is the practiced mystic or genuine truth seeker, those who make it their goal to directly experience and live in truth, that eventually come to realize that the truth is indeed both. It is both relative and universal. There is indeed one truth, one that which actually is, that emanates within or comprises the whole of existence itself, one truth of that which actually is. But it is only in our coming to know that truth, our coming into ever greater alignment or contact with truth, and living in proximity to truth that can only be of our own doing or of our own will. And in uniquely coming to know truth, or our own unique process or journey of coming to know truth, we very much become unique expressions of it, and this uniqueness fulfills the relative aspect of truth. So in this way, truth is both one thing, but can be many things simultaneously. Truth is an all-encompassing or universal commonality, but it exists or manifests in unique expressions, and we can focus our will through our faculties of awareness in order to become unique expressions of the truth ourselves. So do we have to strive to live in truth, or do we have to seek that which actually is? Well, no, we don't have to do anything that is not born from our own free will, and we cannot force others to live authentically as well. But it is, however, absolutely certain that misalignment with truth leads to disempowerment and leads ultimately to suffering. As truth seekers, instilled with our own free will and faculties of discernment, we see the value in truth. We are fulfilled by the inherent power and even healing that truth gives us. Initially coming to know the perhaps uglier or sobering truths of our world can be a bit disturbing or even discouraging at first, but once we map the negative and come to heal the darkness within ourselves, the deeper truths about the nature of what it is to be human, of the life that emanates from the heart of all things, once we come into ever more alignment with what is true, such an act could not be more healing or more rewarding for that matter. So just to be clear, the truth exists. We can either be in alignment or misalignment with it, and it is in the process of gradually coming to know more and more of that truth that we discover how to live and act as unique expressions of truth. And in this way, we make our own contribution to the truth itself. So this is what I ultimately plan to do in this presentation and others like it to come, to uniquely share my direct experiences of truth, to share my own direct knowledge or experiential wisdom of truth with others, and in this way make a contribution to the truth itself, and ultimately contribute, as I said, to the disillusion of shadow and pain and lack of truth in our world today. So it is in fact a mystical axiom that tells us that the primary mission of the planetary spirit, and indeed the human spirit, is to strike the keynote of truth. So we as truth seekers are aligned with the greater mission of the human spirit. In this presentation, we are going to explore not only my own unique experiential wisdom or gnosis of truth, but we are also going to integrate what is going to basically be a synthesis of sacred knowledge, ancient mysticism, and esotericism, knowledge from the ancient world formulated by individuals who also made it their life's journey to know and map how things actually are. And we will compare this to the ideas of modern science and even throw in some modern incarnations of wisdom from contemporary philosophers. And we are going to holistically bring this into the context of transhumanism and what it represents. The reason why it is so important to bring truth into the realm of transhumanism is due to the fact that it, as its mainstream definition says, wishes to transform what it is to be human. And considering the complete lack of wisdom in the mainstream today, especially in the scientific establishment, if there ever was a particular topic that sorely needs to be holistically scrutinized, then transhumanism is most certainly it. So, since truth exists and is indeed capable of being lived by human beings, this begs the question, how do we come into alignment or contact with that which is true? Well, fortunately, as human beings, we have, in a sense, climbed a hierarchy of conscious awareness up to a state of being that is self-aware. We can turn our awareness in on itself or account for that which is within us. We see this progression or hierarchy of consciousness up to a state of being known as a human being, played out in the Kabbalistic axiom that a stone becomes a plant a beast a man, and a man a god. Keep in mind this man-to-God principle because it directly relates to transhumanism, but only in an imbalanced or perverse way, however, a way that is born strictly from the matter and mind of the current scientific paradigm while neglecting the other transdimensional aspects of human awareness. This axiom points to the fact that not only have we as human beings climbed a hierarchy of consciousness, but that everything in existence, even those things of lower awareness than us, are all united in something, in a common progression. That instead of seeing things as things, we should instead see them as a process, as being in a state of flux, moving from one energetic configuration to another, bound by common progression, that there is a commonality in all things, and this commonality can be equated with a primal energetic essence that is conscious, that all things are comprised of consciousness, although the form of consciousness that things take are often very different from awareness as we know it. Nonetheless, everything indeed emits consciousness, whether it is material or immaterial in nature, and this is true from minerals to mountains, from acorns to oak trees, from atoms to entire solar systems, and indeed to human beings themselves. And as a human being, we see that it isn't just our physical body that emits consciousness, but that there are other immaterial aspects of our consciousness that can be directly apprehended and experienced, such as our thoughts, for instance, or the images and narratives, the imaginations of our mind when we daydream, or when we dream at night, for that matter, or our emotions, or our feelings, or our desires. So as a human being, we have a definitive physical nature, but something more as well. There is something that exists and can be felt and experienced beyond our strictly physical nature. And this transphysical or metaphysical nature of human awareness was mapped and known by sacred mystery traditions. It is spelled out in the knowledge of the ancient world. So we in fact experience this immaterial consciousness. It is an integral part of our awareness, not to mention the fact that we can use our awareness as a tool to know ourselves and the existence around us. And so despite what we are told or are conditioned to believe about ourselves, the state of a human being is indeed a very special thing. It is in fact a sacred thing, and it is actually something to feel empowered about, to feel good about, because we as human beings are in fact a reflection of the true principles that comprise existence itself. There is a divine nature within us that, so long as we are willing, can be naturally experienced. And by coming to know the different facets of being that comprise us, we can in turn come to know the true principles that comprise existence itself. This fact that a human being is a much greater thing than the modern control system would have us think, that the sacred nature of a human being in its natural state is indeed a divine reflection of the greater universe as a whole, is often mystically described in the axiom of as above, so below. That man is, in the totality of his being, in fact a miniature universe. Personally, I like to say as within, so without, because I think it more accurately describes the phenomenon. Because when you start to consciously come into contact with ultimate reality, or the metaphysical realms beyond the material world, you begin to perceive that the space and time of our physical universe are mere illusions, and we will get into this more later on. But our consciousness operates in a field that is not bound by the 3D restrictions of time and space. So therefore, on a truer level, man isn't actually a miniature model of the universe so much as he contains the entirety of the universe within him. Consequently, this first layer of ultimate reality, which we have a presence in at all times, some would call it the spiritual realm, this first layer beyond the physical, a type of field, one that is holographic or fractal in nature, in which all individual phenomena manifest within and are contained within. They are not separated by time and space, but are enfolded within themselves in a kind of ever-present source or primal essence that enfolds and permeates all things. And this is true for our immaterial nature, but also our physical body, and indeed the physical universe as a whole. So that which is within us is in actuality that which is seemingly outside of our physical self. So briefly, let's explore that which is within us, or the different facets of being that comprise us, because if we identify and directly experience how these facets work in accordance with one another, we can in fact align ourselves with the true principles that comprise existence itself. We can thus live in truth, and thus come to know truth as well. The various aspects of our perceptive awareness are tools that we utilize to perceive our reality. And the reality in which we find ourselves can be seen by our awareness to have both gross and subtle aspects. Gross aspects are those things that are directly comprehended by our five senses. These senses comprise base awareness, which consequently is the level of awareness that most human beings have been conditioned to perceive from. The more subtle aspects of our world lie beyond the direct comprehension of the five senses. One of the most useful ways to perceive the immaterial aspects that comprise man and his awareness, man's capacity for higher discernment, is to conceive that aspect of one's being in terms of a triune or trivium, which can be described as mind, heart, and will. The mind is the male aspect of one's consciousness and employs tools such as reason, logic, and analytics. It is the thought or thinking-based aspect of one's being. The heart is the feminine aspect of one's being and emits tools such as care, creativity, intuition, and feeling. It is the emotional aspect of one's being. The heart's intuitional capacity is in fact our natural ability to perceive the authenticity of a thing. And when honed properly and put into practice, it is an absolutely essential part of developing true higher discernment. Yet intuition alone cannot entirely bring us to truth. Similarly, logic and intellect alone cannot fully do the job. When we come into contact with information, situations, and experiences, we must utilize both aspects of our consciousness in a balanced manner. Just as is exhibited in the true principles of existence, the masculine and feminine aspects of our being must work in harmony with one another. The mind and heart must be used in an equal, balanced measure. In a world of shadow, however, we must take care to realize that even in truth there are lies. This androgyny or harmony of male and female principles is strictly metaphysical and energetic in nature. As in our world and greater society today, there definitely exists an agenda to blur the lines between gender, to strip males of their masculinity and strip females of their femininity, uniting them in the middle in some homogenized perversion that unites only the broken, imbalanced, lower traits of each gender. And this agenda is, of course, being carried out socially, chemically, psychologically, emotionally, etc. So when we mention uniting the sacred masculine and sacred feminine principles, we must not confuse this with the monogender agenda. We instead see this for its philosophical, metaphysical, and energetic value, that each of us, as natural human beings enfolded within existence, have a definitive intellectual nature, and this is masculine, and a definitive emotional nature, and this is feminine. And when we apply both aspects to the art of perception and being, we are in alignment with truth. The third principle, willpower, is the power or force we use to balance and apply both male and female principles. We must focus the will through the lenses of both heart and mind. As was said previously, one must have the genuine desire to want to know truth, to want to reside in truth, and in the process of coming to know truth, one realizes that knowing is very different than believing. In fact, for coming into contact with truth, belief is not at all that helpful. Belief requires investments based upon zero experience and a kind of bias or allegiance to a particular ideology, an investment that weighs us down and clouds our discernment. However, for the mystic or genuine truth seeker, we can develop a type of faith. We often think of faith in itself as a type of belief or blind allegiance, but for genuine seekers of truth, faith is something different. Faith is something that is built through the practice or direct experience of applying these principles of higher discernment and holistic intelligence to the art of being. In fact, it is a mystical axiom, I think it's a Kabbalistic axiom if I remember correctly, that claims faith to be more important than reason in this respect, that faith can be developed through attainment by focusing the will through the lenses of heart and mind. If we genuinely thirst for wisdom and truth and are honest and honorable in the direct evaluation of what our mind and heart tells us, we will through genuine effort and integrity come to know what is true. And this is what we must develop a kind of faith in, that our genuine desire to know, if we listen to the mind and heart in equal measure, will bring us into contact with what is authentic and real. And by coming to know who and what we are, we in turn come to know the greater truths of the existence we are enfolded within. So by taking account of man as he exists naturally on this planet and his relation to the things of this natural world, as was alluded to earlier, we as human beings are in a state of flux or progression. We have climbed a hierarchy of consciousness and developed as a being that is self-aware. And we can in fact see the stratification of man's development played out in his development in the womb. Citing theosophical philosophy from Blavatsky's Anthropogenesis, we read, quote, that man in the womb develops through stages indistinguishable from fish, reptile, and mammal, until the cell attains the highly specialized development of the quadrumanous, which means the four-handed, as in primates, and at last to the human type. And it goes on to say that this is an occult axiom thousands of years old. It is important not to perceive this hierarchical progression of man in the linear Darwinian sense of evolution. We instead are going to look at evolution, and specifically human evolution, in its more occult or mystery tradition sense, in the concept of evolution as put forth by ancient sacred philosophies. Evolution in this mystical way is known for what it truly is, as a natural progression, one that is cyclical and not linear in nature. It is a universal imperative. If we look at evolution in its current mainstream manifestation, man is thought to have evolved linearly from lower life forms into the current human form, and that evolution is moving man towards some unknown end. From the occult perspective, man is not moving towards some unknown end, rather he is moving to his beginning. In other words, the evolution of man is primarily a spiritual venture, not a linear material one. The stratification of man's development in the womb, therefore, is not indicative of his linear evolutionary development. Rather, it shows that man is the primary blueprint for all life, and that all other life forms that are perhaps lower in conscious awareness can be derived from the totality of what man contains within him. Man is seen to have originated here on earth initially in a more perfected form, one that existed in truth or as truth and was spiritual in nature, a manifestation that was unified with the higher spiritual principles of mind, heart, and will. He then descended into a more astral than quasi-spiritual form, and then finally fell into matter and generation. Generation means that the once unified spiritual nature of man was divided into male and female forms, whereby man then had to physically procreate generationally. His fall into matter or material form is not the result of his sin in a silly biblical way. His coming to know the knowledge of good and evil as put forth by the Bible's fall of man scenario, his partaking of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is pointing to the fact that his sacred feminine essence or sense of morality was objectively separated from the mind, that the mind and heart were now working as separate forces instead of a higher unification. Man in his original state had no need to weigh the balance between good and evil, as his mind, heart, and will existed in a type of unity, not separated out, until man at last fell into the sleep of matter, which is meant to slow and delineate the laws of nature down to such a degree that the relationship between cause and effect is more deliberately and perhaps concretely perceived. The next step in this natural cyclical process is for matter to then rise back into spirit, for the centripetal and centrifugal forces within both to switch, one becoming the other, as man once again reunites with the higher manifestation of himself. Such a cycle is a process of purification, a process of learning and experiential growth that feeds the growing wisdom of the human spirit. Transhumanism, uniting man with physical and mental technology and collectivizing man, would of course arrest this process and condemn man to a prison of mind and matter, arresting the natural ascendant trajectory of man's spiritual development and trapping him in an artificial state of stasis, a stagnancy of spirituality, which, if we take the mystical axiom that the act of standing still in one's spiritual development is in actuality to be sliding backwards, we see that assigning human consciousness to a collectivized technological state, a type of hive mind, we see how such a state is an evolutionary suspension and regression, not a progression as it is being touted, as it is the antithesis of individuality, the antithesis of what it truly means to be human. In the most efficient way possible, human consciousness would thus be controlled in the most adequate way possible in some kind of artificial technological reality, a reality programmed and controlled by an occult secretive rulership. And this agenda has been long in the making. The scientific dogma of our current age is compelling man in this direction. The mindset of modern man resembles less and less of how man thinks and feels if left to his own devices. It is the acquisition of experiential wisdom that has driven all real philosophers, and in bringing such philosophy into our modern age of strict materialism, we see that our age is suffering from being governed exclusively by mind, and this is called phallicism, as the secret doctrine puts it. And such an imbalanced state ignores matters of the heart altogether and ignorantly assigns intuition and more subtle forms of awareness to the realm of superstition. And in this way, misaligned with truth, the whole world suffers, and indeed philosophy itself suffers. This is summed up nicely in Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages. In a portion of its introduction, it reads, quote, "In this age, the word philosophy has little meaning unless accompanied by some other qualifying term. The body of philosophy has been broken up into numerous isms, more or less antagonistic, which have become so concerned with the efforts to disprove each other's fallacies that the sublimer issues of divine order and human destiny have suffered deplorable neglect. The ideal function of philosophy is to serve as the stabilizing influence in human thought. By virtue of its intrinsic nature, it should prevent man from ever establishing unreasonable codes of life. Philosophers themselves, however, have frustrated the ends of philosophy by exceeding their wool-gathering those untrained minds whom they are supposed to lead in the straight and narrow path of rational thinking." Unquote. So we see that the function of philosophy is to serve as a kind of balancer to the pitfalls of a world governed by an imbalanced worldview, to keep the progression of man's aspirations focused on and not to lose sight of the bigger picture. But modern philosophy, as with most things, has been absorbed by dogmatic scientism and a materialistic, strictly mind-based worldview. This is where transhumanism comes in, because it is a monstrous ideology that has arisen from man forgetting who he actually is, from mistaking his physical self for the totality of his being. Modern man lives in a state of shadow, obscured from the illumination of truth. Modern man's state of suffering, his immersion in base consciousness, totally governed by his five senses, mistaking the illusion or the reflection of ultimate reality seen in our physical world for the real thing, is due first and foremost to man's misalignment with truth. It is for this reason that most human beings do not consciously reside or are not consciously present in the actual world. They instead reside in a mental model of the world, an artificial construct of consensus perception. And those who choose not to uphold or conduct their own reality inevitably reside by default in a reality of someone else's design. And it is in fact an imperial rulership, a small group of reality architects who utilize the sacred higher knowledge of humanity's past, using this knowledge as a tool of control, knowledge of the higher principles of human consciousness, and how they relate to the greater reality within and outside of ourselves. And in this way, they have manipulated and exploited humanity as a whole. These individuals operate atop a pyramidal control system, a very efficient system, a pyramid that operates predominantly by stratifying knowledge and technology throughout all lower levels of the pyramid. In essence, the natural ascendant trajectory of the human spirit has been intercepted and rerouted to serve what is ostensibly the degenerate whims of a predatory rulership. This degenerate nature of the rulership often manifests as a psychopathic modality of being, or an overtly left-brain predatory consciousness that puts to use the will and the male principles of mind while suppressing or altogether disregarding the compassion, care, wisdom, and emotion of the heart. The predatory psyche of the ruling class upholds reason and logic as the fundamental markers for human intelligence. Thus, a predatory psyche centered in intellect inevitably comes to rule via principles of logistical analysis and optimized efficiency. And the most efficient way to control consciousness is to collectivize it, to convince as many individuals as possible to adhere to what is fundamentally a cult of consensus perception. There are many different techniques used to accomplish this, but when distilled, these techniques can be broken down into three main areas. The first area can be described as us versus them, where you and all the people like you are doing it right, and here I'm speaking of the consensus. The consensus are doing it right, and everybody else is doing it wrong. The second can be described as groupthink, a system of thought whereby group members reach consensus conclusions without critical evaluation, where maintaining group consensus is more important than actually achieving results or evolving. The third is marked by the complete surrendering of individuality. In this tenet, the group is always more important than the individual. These three principles work to keep the cult of the consensus functioning, and they operate entirely outside the realm of conscious awareness. The consensus mindset is steered in particular directions by using dialectics, and a method in particular known, of course, as the Hegelian Dialectic, or as it is commonly referred to as problem, reaction, solution. A problem is deliberately caused, evoking a contrived and steered reaction, by which a preconceived solution is then provided. With transhumanism, we see that the dogma of scientific materialism itself provides the problem. In this particular analysis of the equation, we're going to look at transhumanism as the contrived or steered reaction put forth by the problems created by science. And finally, the rulership's pre-planned future, their post-human world, is the solution. So transhumanism is the ideological reactionary avenue by which the rulership planned to usher in their future. Momentarily, we will more adequately explain the tenets of transhumanism and this pre-planned future. But let's first focus on the problematic aspect of the Hegelian equation by holistically analyzing and critiquing the religion or cult of scientific materialism. Science today, in its mainstream sense, and to be fair, this is excluding the perhaps baby steps of progress made by quantum physics or even superstring theory or M theory, but if we look at scientific materialism in its mainstream sense, in its paradigmatic sense, it is a strictly physical venture, not only in its attitudes, but in its areas of activity. It assumes that the physical world which we see around us and its accompanied atomic, subatomic, and larger celestial phenomena is the only reality. Material existence is what is real, and anything other than this physicality is only mere speculation of some kind. It claims that as we go further and further out into space, and smaller into space, that we may perhaps encounter previously unknown phenomena, but it's all physical in nature. It is all some giant expansion to be conquered by scientific advancement, by the creation of newer and more advanced instruments of investigation, and by adherence or continual recognition of a code called the scientific method. Regardless of what we should do or how we should progress, claims science, we are working with physical matter and physical instruments. To the material scientist, existence extends to the ultimate, absolute extremity of conditioned existence. That physicality extends outward, on and on, beyond all solar systems, stars, and nebula, farther and vaster than we can imagine. And when going smaller, is comprised of particles that can be divided or deconstructed into smaller and smaller particles, until at last we reach the smallest cohesive particle that is the fundamental building block for all things. But again, everything is physical and is there to be seen by the scientific beholder, so long as he or she is supported by the ongoing advancement of scientific equipment. To be fair, quantum physics has just begun to rethink certain fundamental scientific dogmas and rediscover knowledge from the ancient world. But for the vast majority, the mainstream dogmatic adherence to physicality reigns supreme and infiltrates all scientific disciplines and indeed infiltrates most of all of human culture as well. We now live in a world constantly reinforced and upheld by allegiance to physicality and allegiance to what is strictly confirmed by the base consciousness of five-sense reality. Every now and then a scientist may lift up the corner of the curtain or lift up the corner of the veil of the illusion of matter in order to take a small peek at the infinite majesty of existence, only then to quickly drop it back down again. And this reticence to explore beyond the boundaries set by the current paradigm is due predominantly to the fact that the dogma or culture of science is held together by the aforementioned principles of group mentality. The ancients had one up on modern man today. They knew that material existence was a mere reflection of something infinitely greater, that the material universe was just an appendage of something infinitely greater and more intelligent and majestic. Ancient peoples upheld the primacy of felt experience. They knew that the aspects of an individual human being's consciousness not only were tools to contact ultimate reality, but that these facets were reflections of that which comprised the totality of existence itself. That we as individual human beings very much possess the tools to contact the true nature of existence that we are fractally enfolded within. Today, personal direct experience is jettisoned altogether for group ideals, and held together by such things as social conditioning, the control of funding, immersion in base consciousness and ego identification, peer pressures, and on a higher level, occult methodologies, reality building, and sorcery. It is quite ironic as well that such a highly intellectual enterprise as modern scientism would progress and unfold along such illogical lines of upholding group allegiance over actual experiential results. A very interesting and enlightening way to perceive the logical fallacies inherent to the way that science progresses along these group assumptions and systems of belief is to examine the work of Thomas S. Kuhn and his work on the structure of scientific revolutions. Kuhn points out glaring problems with the way that normal science is conducted, as things like belief and allegiance to the current overall paradigm are more important than actual experiential results. And when we examine his work, try to keep in mind the three principles of us versus them, groupthink, and collectivism in regard to the hive mentality of science. So let's now give a synopsis of Kuhn's excellent work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Kuhn was interested in the history of science and knew that philosophers had a great deal to gain from the history of how science progresses. Insufficient attention to this history has led modern science to construct an inadequate and naive picture of the scientific enterprise and how it works. Kuhn was especially interested in scientific revolutions, or periods of great change and upheaval to existing scientific ideas, when a paradigm of existing ideas is challenged and replaced by a radically new one. Examples of such scientific revolutions are the Copernican revolution in astronomy, the Darwinian revolution in biology, the Einsteinian revolution in physics, and so on. Each of these revolutions led to a fundamental change in the mainstream scientific community's worldview, the overthrow of an existing set of ideas by a completely different set of ideas. These revolutions, of course, happen relatively infrequently, Most of the time, any given period of science is not in a state of upheaval or revolution, and Kuhn calls these periods of unremarkable status quo normal science to describe the normal everyday activities that scientists engage in when their discipline is not undergoing any revolutionary change. Primary to Kuhn's account of these periods of normal science is the concept of paradigms. And paradigms, as Kuhn explained, consisted of two main components. There were firstly a set of fundamental theoretical assumptions that all members of a scientific community accept at any given time, and secondly a set of what he calls exemplars, or particular scientific problems that have been solved by means of those theoretical assumptions, and these exemplars appear, of course, in the textbooks of the discipline in question. But a paradigm is much more than just a theory. When scientists share a paradigm, they do not just agree on certain scientific propositions, they also agree on how future scientific research in their field should proceed. They agree on which problems are the pertinent ones to tackle, on what the appropriate methods for solving those problems are, on what an acceptable solution of the problem should look like, and so on. In short, a paradigm is an entire scientific outlook. It is a constellation or grouping of shared assumptions, beliefs, and values that unite a scientific community and allow normal science to take place. So what does normal science involve? Well, according to Kuhn, normal science involves a type of puzzle solving. No matter how successful a paradigm is, it will always encounter certain problems, phenomena that it cannot easily accommodate for, mismatches between the theory's predictions and the experimental facts. And the job of the normal scientist is to try and eliminate these minor puzzles while making as few changes as possible to the paradigm. So normal science is actually a highly conservative enterprise. Its practitioners are not trying to rock the boat or make any earth-shattering new discoveries, but rather to just develop and extend the existing paradigm. To quote Kuhn, normal science does not aim at novelties of fact or theory, and when successful, finds none. Unquote. Above all, Kuhn stressed that normal scientists are not trying to test the paradigm. On the contrary, they accept the paradigm unquestioningly and conduct their research within the limits the paradigm sets. If a normal scientist gets an experimental result that conflicts with the paradigm, they will usually assume that their experimental technique is faulty, not that the paradigm itself is wrong. Questioning the paradigm is non-negotiable. Typically, a period of normal science lasts many decades, sometimes even centuries, during which time scientists gradually articulate the paradigm, fine-tuning it, filling in details, solving more and more puzzles, extending its range of application, and so on. But over time, anomalies are discovered that simply cannot be reconciled with the theoretical assumptions of the paradigm, however hard normal scientists try. When anomalies are few in number, they tend to just get ignored. But as more and more anomalies accumulate, a burgeoning sense of crisis envelops a scientific community. Confidence in the existing paradigm breaks down, and the process of normal science temporarily grinds to a halt. This marks a period of time known as revolutionary science, and during such periods, fundamental scientific ideals are up for grabs. A variety of alternatives to the old paradigm are proposed, and eventually a new paradigm is established. A generation or so is usually required before all members of the scientific community are won over to the new paradigm, and this marks the completion of a scientific revolution. The essence of a scientific revolution is thus the shift from an old paradigm to a new one. So this is absolutely fascinating and can be applied not just to science, but to all matters of human activity. For those interested in steering human activity, you can see how an accurate knowledge of humanity's history and the human tendency to form group beliefs and adhere to those beliefs would be beneficial. The essence or value we can draw from Kuhn's work is that it indeed was quite an intuitive and astute understanding of how man is indeed a funny and curious creature, that he can tend to ascribe to group belief systems and paradigms naturally, but that if this nature or inclination is more keenly noted or viewed from a wider perspective, perhaps by those with a more complete outlook of human history, these natural inclinations can be exploited and steered in particular directions. Kuhn stressed the naivety of mainstream scientific practitioners, that without an accurate view or context of the history of how science progresses, individuals are more likely to be naively blinded by the social gravity of a current scientific dogma. This is where manufactured myopia, or historic nearsightedness, is worth noting. It is the common conception of everyday individuals, including scientists, to regard our current state of human affairs as representing the height of human progress in all aspects of human activity, and the aforementioned linear narrative of Darwinian evolution and other mainstream scientific dogmas certainly bolsters this thinking. When individuals are given an inaccurate view of human history, when they conceive human civilization as currently existing in its optimized progressive state, residing at the culmination of human progress, civilization, and knowledge, they are much less likely to question how humanity proceeds, are much less able to predict how and in what direction the future is unfolding, and are inept as to how the future should actually propel man forward, and so on. Why even seek knowledge of humanity's past if our current state of affairs is the best we've ever had it? If our current scientific and technological institutions have figured things out more thoroughly and adequately than ever before, why not only ascribe to them? After all, they are the best thus far. This naivety is a fundamental conditioned state of a world in shadow, and is leading the majority of our species down a path that is not of their own design. Those who have tasked themselves with ruling humanity possess knowledge of man's consciousness and how it operates, and thus formulate paradigms that tactfully assault the interdependent faculties of man's perceptive awareness, the mind, the heart, and the will, by supplanting false ideologies in the mind of man, such as that he arose by accident in a relentless, chaotic, and ruthless struggle for sustenance, and by using a variety of propagandistic techniques to bypass logic and appeal to man on an emotional level, exploiting his emotional inclinations and making man at odds with himself intellectually and emotionally, causing disconnect and conflict between his mentation and emotional health. This breeds abulia, or loss of will, which is more easily encouraged when individuals are at odds with themselves eternally, when they are in pain and do not know how to alleviate that pain. Thus they disavow their own will. They appeal to an external and personal authority of a perceived higher power and responsibility. In this way, their actions are more adequately manipulated. The conditional state of any given society is directly related to the quality of behavior within that society. Thus, humanity is externally herded and steered in particular directions to fulfill the whims of the degenerate rulership. We once again see how the triune of mind, heart, and will is absolutely central to understand in order to truly come to know the workings and manipulation waged against the public today, and how those without a direct apprehension and working experience of such knowledge are manipulated themselves. At the crux of the disconnect between the heart and mind of modern man, in the upswells of such a broken state of being, is scientific evangelism and technocratic atheism, which together work to completely collapse any remaining notions of the divine. Tactfully disillusioned by the religious fanaticism of previous centuries, today's scientific missionaries have indeed predictably swung to the polar opposite extreme. They proclaim a world with zero divinity and zero magic, just a big, dead galactic machine that is hostile to human life. Such distorted perceptions have arisen from those haunted by the artificial inflatement of their own egoic fears and prejudices, as they work to uphold their imbalanced worldview by self-indulgently chastising those who do not share their own views, all the while never considering that their views, just like the religious fundamentalists whom they consider themselves to be intellectually superior, are views that very much amount to the same thing, and that is belief. Belief is often about comfort. It is reassuring that today will be the same as it was yesterday, and that others share the same worldview that you do. But when we ascribe to group assumptions and group beliefs, if truth is the true, real object of our wanting, by the group we indeed falter. Actually interfacing with reality and coming into direct contact with it on our own naturally is much more instructive and also superior to merely theorizing about it. The mystic, or truth seeker, knows individual direct experience is the only way to truth, never by following group assumptions. Gnosis can only ever be achieved on one's own, by their own experience, but when we share these experiences with others, we can at least help to stimulate the initiation of the journey for truthful discovery. In presentations like this, what we are really doing is trying to stimulate a feeling or trigger a memory in others that will lead them to initiate themselves. We must give birth to ourselves, to the truer manifestation of ourself, not the degenerated, pain-stricken shell of a being we have been conditioned to view ourselves as. The scientific method, with its reliance on separation, measurement, and reductionism, is an imbalanced and very limited view of the world that cannot help us experience genuine truth by itself. Materialistic inferences, no matter how painstaking and scrupulous, are at odds with the wide-ranging, holistic, and multidisciplinary attitude that is required for actually evolving our consciousness on our own. The materialist worldview only obstructs our efforts to perceive beyond the particulated veil of the material world, or Maya as it is called in Eastern spiritual philosophies. The primacy of our actual felt experience is consistently more useful and meaningful than the smug and pompous abstractions of scientism. Those scientific fundamentalists who, keyword, believe that scientific principles are superior or more indicative of what is real than all other disciplines, including philosophical, mystical, spiritual, and humanist interpretations of life. The control system sponsors scientism by overexposing various figureheads like popular physicists, atheists, and transhumanists alike, who in themselves all exhibit some form of spiritual devolution. As intellectually sharp as some of them are, they lack the psychic integrity and spiritual humility that is so palpable in those who truly walk the ascendant path. They are trapped in a materialistic prison of the ego and the intellect, and have shut out matters of the heart almost completely. They listen only to the chatter of their brain, and have mistaken that chatter as wholly representative of who they actually are. Scientific materialists thus have little to likely zero relationship with the higher manifestation of their metaphysical self. They are broken men and women, and the control system props them up as authorities or experts in their particular discipline. And it is this expertology and the people's deferral to it, their maintenance or willful ignorance and disregarding of their own self-knowledge and personal experience to instead adopt the views of external authorities and experts, allowing them to construct their own reality for them. It is this that is building the constituents of a human hive that in its totality comprises the modern technocracy. Because this worldview is so misaligned with truth, it is a breeding ground for problems, pain, and fear, and for those who have, since the beginning of civilization itself, sought to keep man in a state of low-fidelity consciousness in order to harvest his low-vibrational conscious energy. It becomes easy to see how such a modern mindset is a contrived one, that the cult of scientific materialism was encouraged specifically to usher in a debased, post-human era, an era that would not be possible were man not convinced to such a high degree that he not only was not divine himself, as religions like Christianity encourage him to believe, but to take this even a step further, that divinity in of itself was always non-existent, nothing more than a fleeting superstition, a frivolous concept, and a relic of more arcane times. The scientific dogma of the day tells man he is a non-soul, trapped within the prison of his dying flesh, decaying in a universe that is itself hostile to life. But that out of this darkness a savior would come, a messiah known as technology. That with genetic manipulation and transhumanist technologies, man could yet attain freedom from death, that he could, alas, reach immortality, that the old superstitious idea of divinity could now be achieved by becoming something more than merely a pathetic human being, that he could become humanity plus through technology, and that this was humanity's actual destiny. In reality, this is of course placating and taking advantage of the pain that most have, the pain of not knowing the true, ever-present divinity and higher nature already within themselves, of not knowing the oneness, the love, and the power latent within themselves. Transhumanism is thus a nefarious exploitation of every individual's natural inclination toward self-evolution, by presenting transhumanism as the only real option. The transhuman future is one where humanity will no longer have individuated distinction as we know it. Instead, all would be permanently plugged into the hive, where via computer chips implanted in the human brain or by other unknown technological means, humanity would be able to uplink to the wealth of all human knowledge, an internet of the mind, which would of course in actuality mark the ultimate accomplishment in the ruling class's efforts to completely collectivize and control humanity. Those who program this reality would obviously control not only the individuals within it, but eventually all parameters of the collective human mind. This direct and absolute control over the reality of the bulk of humanity, manipulated totally from the outside in, would fulfill the perverse aspirations of the occult rulership to attain godhood over man, to become the complete creator of man's reality. A dark rise to self-deluded godhood, the imbalanced and dark path, the left-hand path of dark occultism and ritual illuminism. This itself represents a very interesting dynamic, as the material reality in which man finds himself currently is itself an illusion or reflection of what forces exist behind it, and so a collectivized technological hive reality would be yet another layer of distortion. It would represent a reality in a sense disconnected twice-fold from truth, a continuation of entropic chaos, which is also known as cancer. And since it is only truth that can truly alleviate human suffering, physically, spiritually, and psychologically, it's not at all out of bounds to say that such a reality indeed represents the epitome of what we know as hell. Yet transhumanism promises to liberate man from the prison of his dying flesh, to relieve him of anxieties inspired from the prospective void of eternal nothingness that awaits a brain ceasing to fire its synapses. It pledges to unite man in knowledge, to combine all known and documented information into one collective God mind, freely tapped for its boundless power and infinite potential. Yet for all the struggle, uncertainty, and death that transhumanism vows to vanquish, perhaps what we should fear most is being swallowed up in the vacuous black hole left by transhumanism's staggering lack of wisdom. The predatory ruling class are unsurprisingly responsible for such poisonous ideology, and based upon a previous track record spanning no less than the whole of human history, these social predators will undoubtedly continue to promote nothing but limitation upon human freedom and well-being. Any technological advancements spawned during their illegitimate tenure, and covertly overseen by their influence, will lead only to more highly perfected versions of the very same enslavement the masses have grown to uphold. If such visions of a transhuman future are fulfilled, the dark architects of civilization will at last achieve total control over the collective mind of the human hive, in a final realization of a twisted dream that has inspired their malicious strategy for centuries, a left-hand apotheosis, if you will. Okay, so this is a good place to wrap up part one of this presentation. The key points we need to take away from this should be, in the Hegelian sense, that transhumanism is indeed a reactionary ideology spurred on by the vast problems and pain caused by dogmatic adherence to scientific materialism, a reaction to usher in the solution of a post-human world. Transhuman man, united in a collective hive mind of technology, a reality totally controlled from the outside by an occult rulership, would see the rulership fulfilling their aspirations, and themselves achieving a type of dark godhood, the utmost creators of humanity's collective hive reality. We also need to realize that on an individual level, each of us already has all the potential, all the tools necessary to become much more than the current manifestation of who we are, to become truer versions of ourselves, and this self-guided evolution is what can save us from the current collective devolution of the human family. And that in uniting in truth, this is the only value we should uphold. That so long as technology is controlled from behind the scenes by a psychopathic elite, such technology is ultimately designed to promote the future monoculture and monosociety so long planned by the ruling class. In part 2, we will explore the actual technological trends that are unfolding toward a transhuman future, as well as explore the work and dialogue of transhumanists themselves. We'll also more deeply explore the dark occult side of these plans in relation to the fall of man's scenario, and how this relates to harvesting man's debased consciousness in order to sustain the dark entropic forces that the rulership have since the ancient world collaborated with in the ongoing subjugation of humanity. Above all, in part 1 and part 2 that is yet to come, we uphold truth in the highest regard, for in truth lies the key to the future advancement and evolution of the human species. So thanks, and stay tuned for part 2 of Left Hand Apotheosis, Transhumanism and the Rulership's Quest for Godhood.